Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar that we are starting to present on language learning and using the internet. My name is John Johnson, and I will be presenting today for you so that we can just go over the main topics and the main ideas and sharing ideas, because you will be able to share with me through chat on sharing ideas and discussing how it's possible to work with the internet for your language communication skills. The first part, what I would like to do is I would like to have a chance to go over in general the main topics that I would like to bring up, and then we can go over them further on in a little bit more detail. So let me go over the main aspects of what I would like to discuss today. The first part is the number one, is because it's going to be set up in 10 sections, and then I'll give you some resources. So number one is the idea that it takes time to do these kind of things. Learning a language, it takes time. So learning English on the net, learning languages on the net, whether it be English or other languages, it takes time. And roughly over my years of experience, I have been able to calculate that it takes approximately 6 months to really move up one level. I have seen faster and I have seen slower, but it's approximately 6 months to move from A1 to A2, from B1 to B2, C1 to C2, etc. So part one is that it takes time. The next part, so part two, what I wanted to discuss a little bit is that it's a little bit easier if you set goals for your language learning and language learning on the net. To set specific goals, it helps a lot in choosing the materials. It helps a lot in choosing the systems that will be of interest for you to use as tools for your progress. Part three is trying to find those materials that will fit, because materials are varying all the time, and there are new resources that are coming out. So to be able to choose and to pick your level test, pick your resources so that you can have an effective experience on using the net for your language learning. And then we go into part four, which is to change your daily routine. So in other words, that if you, to create a little bit of variety, if it's possible, to change your routine so that you're not always doing the same thing. So that if one day you are working with media such as film, then the following day it might be possible to do some e-learning, and the following day it might be possible to do some interactivity with live other language learners on the internet. Part five is to find your community. Where is that community? The community can be either through Skype, it can be through chat boards, it can be through chat. We'll give you some resources after. So, and then we go to part six, where I will be discussing choosing material that is interesting for you, which is one of the most crucial things, is to find something so that it's motivating to learn a language. And this is a bit of a trick to make sure that you stay motivated as you're going along. Part seven is working with grammar. Now, grammar is necessary. Grammar pure is not something that you will be working on specifically as far as usage. On occasion, that might be the case, but it must be put into context. And the rule that I like to use is it's similar to doing scales when you're playing a musical instrument. Scales per se are not really used, but they can be put into different contexts. They will make the performance of the music a lot better if you do have strong control over your technical aspect of the instrument. Number 8 is speaking out loud. One of the issues around working on the net is that we do not have a lot of opportunity to be speaking, which is something that can be fixed quite quickly, and we'll give you a couple of tips and secrets in these 10 different strategies for using the net for your tools to make it advantageous for you. And number 10 is communicating. And so the aspect of communicating is to make sure that you are in touch with people, that you put all you have learned into production. And following that, so we will go through the 10 points, and then following that, what I will present to you are some resources so that you have an opportunity to see where this material might be able to, I can give you some tips. as to where this material is and where it lies. Okay, so let's just begin. Okay, so part one. Part one, we're going to talk about 6 months, or how much time it takes to learn this. So the first part is that you have to be patient with your language learning. It takes time. There's no way around it, and it takes a systematic approach to understanding on how you can take advantage of the time that's involved. So be patient with it. I have several different experiences, such as a situation where a brother-in-law of mine was in Europe, and quite interestingly, he was able to pick up German quite quickly, which was something that was interesting for me to see. This is a long time ago, but having worked in this environment for 1 year, having gone to this situation for 1 year, he was able to pick the language up almost fluently, at least in a communicative sense, in 6 months. So it is possible to do, not only to move up one level, but to move up 2 levels. The normal standard is that it's approximately 6 months for each level when you're moving up, for each systematic and concerted effort into your approach into moving up a certain level. So using the net, which is the basis of this webinar, it's possible to take advantage of putting in the appropriate amount of time. There is a very famous book in the Anglo-Saxon world called Outliers. It's a Canadian author by the name of Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell is an interesting guy because he talks about, he didn't coin, as we say in English, the phrase of 10,000 hours, but that the idea that it takes about 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. They did calculations that it's approximately Mozart's first big works came out after he had done 10,000 hours of work, which is equal to doing, let's say, a PhD. It can be 6, 7 years altogether. The only thing is that it has to be a concerted effort. So the 10,000 hour rule, in that it takes time, we don't have to spend 10,000 hours, but that could be 10,000 hours could be from going from an A1 to, let's say, a C1 level. It's not impossible, or even to a C2 level, such as people that become specialists and they do degrees and they study and they follow this kind of a procedure. So point number one, the important point about this whole strategy about working and basically on the net, because we can be logging in time on the net, the 10,000 hour rule, or that it takes a certain amount of time and that you have to have a certain amount of patience while you're working. So point number one, be patient. Okay, now this brings us up to point number two. Point number two is setting objectives. Now, setting objectives is logical and it makes sense, but what does it do? Setting your objectives will set it will make it a lot easier to set the process and the materials and the tools that you will need to accomplish your specific objectives. So setting a goal such as, I want to be able to visit Montreal and to be able to speak in a French whereby I can travel through the city properly, that can be a very global objective, and then it's possible to break it down into smaller steps. It's similar to be saying, I would like to be able to travel in Denmark and to be able to do speeches. Mind you, they all speak English in Denmark, so that it would be possible for integration into the community, that if you would want to be able to connect in a professional context, that you would say, my objectives are to be able to run a meeting in Danish or in Dutch or in German or in English, for that matter, the different languages. And how would I do that? That would make it a lot easier for me to pick the material if I know that that's the objective. That's one of the first things that we have. And just so that you do know, when we do go through the EnglishAZ site, at the end of the level test, we always set objectives, and then there's an automatic machine that sets the curriculum for you. The objectives are important. So point number two, set your objectives and to think about them, which will bring us to point number three. So point number three is choosing your material. And choosing your material means that you're very careful about the levels that you're working in, and of course the context of the material. So if it's possible to be picking materials that are appropriate for your level. So once the level is established, and there are many tools to be doing this kind of thing, but for instance, on the EnglishAZ site, we have level tests that very concisely can put you into the proper level, that you're picking materials that are appropriate for your level. For instance, and I know this might sound like a little bit of an anomaly, but the popular press, which we can find on the net, popular press can be a little bit more restrictive as far as your material is concerned because of the colloquialisms, because of the slang, and because of the expressions and the context in which the articles are written, for example, can be more complex to read than reading, for instance, The Economist. So it's important to be able to pick according to your level, and to find materials that are appropriate for your levels. So to be very much in tune with being patient, to setting your objectives, to number 3, to be making sure that you're picking the material that is appropriate for your level and for the context. So, and that will bring us to point number 4. Okay, so now point number 4 is a little bit different, because point number 4 talks about changing the routine. We all become a little bit routined in the way we work, and to be careful about that kind of thing, because if it's possible to create a certain amount of variety, and it might be possible to be setting it into your more structured and detailed program that you put together for your language learning, but to keep it a little bit more varied. So for example, what might be possible to do is to be finding appropriate, and maybe even structuring it this way, and once again, put it into the e-learning programs, to be structuring something so that it's possible to do a certain amount of reading during the week. Let's say we want to do a certain amount of listening during the week. We want to do a certain amount of speaking during the week, and we want to do a certain amount of writing during the week, if those are the 4 objectives that we want for the 4 disciplines. So perhaps it might be possible, and a good idea is to create a little bit of variety. Otherwise, human nature will kick in and we're going to get bored with it. So it might be possible to do something like on a Monday, it can be an excerpt from the net, from some video on the net, such as TED, and I will explain that a little bit later. So if you're working with TED, another thing that you can do is to say Monday, we're going to be doing a little bit of TED, on Tuesday, a little bit of e-learning, and on Wednesday, we can be doing some video, and on Thursday, to be doing some repetition exercises so that we're doing a certain amount of speaking, and on Thursday, we can be doing some writing exercises, and on Friday, we can be doing our coaching with or talking with your online community, so that there's a bit of variety during the week. It's absolutely crucial. Just a quick little story. I was working with a student today, professional student, and it was interesting because we've been working together for a while, and there's a certain amount of progress that goes on, but he brought up to me the fact that there's a certain amount of motivation, the motivational aspect that can deteriorate over a period of time, and this is something that we've been working on for a year. And the progress is significant, and that I sense it, he senses it. He's able to do things such as the objectives that we set out earlier on. He's able to do the objectives that he wants to do, but what he did say to me today, which was interesting, is that he is getting a little bit bored with the way that that the process is going for him. And so what we did do is we started to put a little bit of variety into the educational process, to add some different things, to change on a weekly basis, on a 3-day, let's say, basis, where you can be doing different exercises to be working on improving your language learning. Because with the 10,000 hour rule, we know that we have to go through this process. It has to be a concerted effort. It has to be something that's structured and thought about, but you have to go through this volume of work, depending on different circumstances, of course. But so creating a variety in the process will help you out. And that brings us to our next point. Okay, so now we're at point number 5. Point number 5 is finding your community. Find out where you can possibly go and have an opportunity to be interacting with people, to be putting everything into production, so that you have this chance to exercise all of the work that you're working on. And I'll be talking a little bit later on about grammar, about how to use this actually quite strategically so that you can put it right into production. So to find your community. Now, community can be local, it can be cafes, it can be online, it can be on Skype. There are many different resources for that kind of thing. What we do on EnglishAZ, once again, is we have regular sessions through Skype where we get people together from all over the world. We have people coming in from Morocco and from South America and in from Canada and in Europe, all over the place, so that they can talk, and this community grows, and we provide opportunities for them to perhaps speak together. So this point number 5 is to be finding your community. And where is that community? That brings us to point number six. That brings us to point number 6. Okay, point number 6 is making sure that you're picking materials that you're interested in. If I'm very interested in music, then it will be more interesting, such as jazz, which is one of my hobbies. So if I'm interested in music, then it would be appropriate for me to be reading about, if I'm studying Spanish, for that example, to be reading through trade magazines, for instance, about the jazz community in South America, for example, in Brazil, if I'm, or in Argentina. To be finding the things that will make it, once again, this is a motivational aspect, is to be choosing materials that are appropriate for you. So for instance, I have one student right now who loves to play poker. And it's very interesting because with the aspect of playing poker that's of interest for him, when we bring this up, it's something that he will immediately start to want to get into. So then the discussion comes up, and of course numbers are really good, and of course talking about all of the different flavors of cards, hearts and spades, and etc., but also the dynamic of the game. And it also makes it very interesting for him to be watching poker television. And so he is motivated and will think in English. He has the structure. Whenever we start to talk in a poker context, his English is immediately significantly better. So if it's possible to find materials that are appropriate, to integrate them into your structures, to be maybe speaking to the communities that are around your interests, this can be something that is very interesting for you. So picking your materials. Somebody else, for example, in a professional context, somebody might be interested in preparing meetings, for example, finding appropriate. I do a lot of work with Harvard Business Review from Inc. magazine, from The Economist, from Fortune magazine, from Canadian newspapers, from Australian newspapers. So there's a little bit of a variety in a professional context, so that we can find things that are appropriate. If somebody's looking to get a job, they're doing a job interview, then it's appropriate to be finding materials, articles or materials that will be of interest for them. So in a professional context, that's also a possibility. And perhaps something that I shouldn't forget is that if somebody's doing standardized testing, if they're doing TOEFL, BULATs, if they're doing YELTS, if they're doing whatever the tests are, that the material be appropriate for them, so that it can be hopefully of interest. I mean, those standardized tests are not always so. And once again, on the EnglishAZ website, what we do have is integrated hopefully fun learning and fun ideas and sharing with fun ideas, but putting them subtly into the context of TOEIC and TOEFL and all of the other standardized exams. So that's something. Try to find material that will be of relevance and of pertinence and of interest to you, if you're learning the language or if you're somebody who's involved in teaching other people. These are ideas that we can share, and I'm seeing that people are coming up on chat Skype, so we'll be able to not Skype, on chat through I think this is through YouTube, I think this one. So and so that brings us to our next point, is putting grammar into action. Now, putting grammar into action is not easy to do, I don't think. I've done it before, I've tested it. And how do you do that, in fact? And I have one solution that, once again, I propose to all of my students as we're going along. What I propose is, if we're working on a grammar point, such as working on modals, etc., for during the week, what I say is that if in an interaction, so in the community, so in the interaction, if it's possible to think of something ahead of time, to be prepared a sentence, or a small concept, a paragraph, something that you can present that will be using that grammar point. So putting it into action. So for example, just a quick scenario, I was once in a situation where I was working in a multi-language environment. and I had opportunities to work with administration. It was an academic institution. And what I would try to do on a weekly basis, and this was for me in French, so and other languages too, Dutch, for example, what I would try to do is I would always try to take advantage of using the circumstance where I would be working with the community. So what I could do is I could put into production, as I call it. You can put into production some of the technical aspects that I've worked on. So, for example, modals, or for example, new vocabulary, and it's very similar to when you are working with somebody and you first meet them, and their name is Xavier, or their name is Diego. The first time that you say their name is more difficult, but the second time it becomes easier, and then after the third, fourth time, then it's a breeze. It's not that difficult to do, but what is important to think about in these different circumstances is that it's putting it into production. The first time it is the most difficult. So to be thinking about that when you have something more of a difficult structure. So this point being, putting grammar into action. So it's not just pure. So, and one last anecdote or something to compare to, it's similar to when you're learning music. That, let's say in jazz, or if you are involved with different other hobbies of some kind, painting, it can be the same if you're doing dance and you have a particular movement that you want to incorporate. But for me, let's say if it's in music, it's in a jazz context, I might be working on the keyboard, on the piano, and I have a new idea that I want to put out. Now that will be in a simulated context. It would be similar to working with grammar rules. It's the same thing, but once I start to put it into a rehearsal, and then we start to put it into production, then what happens is it starts to become part of their regular vocabulary. So taking a conceptual context and putting it into production, and then to making it part of your regular vocabulary, that's the objective of taking grammar and working with it in a very realistic and a productive and a production context. So taking something from theoretical and putting it into your everyday routine. It's the same thing for working with phrasal verbs, and the same thing for expressions. It's the same idea. So to take, for instance, we do have on the site, again, the ebook where we have phrasal verbs and we also have expressions. Those are a long-term strategy to be working with them. After we go through them with a certain period of time, then they start to become your own because they're being used. And do repetition, speak it out loud, absolutely, and use it, and even simulate realistic circumstances, so that this is the context of you can simulate the context of putting the theoretical into the practice. Or as Shakespeare said, you have to repeat things 3 times before they actually start to go into production. So this idea of moving grammar into production. Which brings us to point number 8. Now, point number 8 is speaking out loud. So to be saying something out loud. If you are learning certain aspects of technical language, you hear them, it's very important to be speaking. So how do you learn how to speak? Is by speaking. How do you learn how to understand? It's by listening. And how do you learn how to read and to understand reading? Is by reading. And how do you learn how to write? It's by writing. Those are the 4 disciplines. Now, one of the most difficult ones is the speaking discipline. And what I'd like to emphasize is that as you're reading or you're speaking with somebody, that you use extended sentences, that you read out loud, etc., etc. This will put this all into practice. So reading out loud is one of the best solutions. I always say to, for instance, right now, for breaks in time, or if somebody will not be doing regular coaching sessions, or they're not involved with their language training at this point in time, that what they can do is they can go to the net, for example, because this is about the net, and all of these resources are on the net. What you can do is you can take a text and just read it out loud. And what I say is, if there's a certain break in time, what I propose is media for listening, and to find a good book that you like really a lot, something, and then to be reading it out loud. This will give you enough effort, enough practice to be able to take advantage of a break in time. And just a quick little story again. I'm in France. When I first moved to France, I was trying to work on my French. So what I was doing was I was certainly interacting with people. It was a tremendously lovely opportunity. But what I was doing was I took a certain period of time during the week where I started to read. And once again, I didn't choose the popular press. I was reading from Le Monde, which is more of the political, more of the serious French publication environments, and I would just read it out loud. What I found now, and the first days you think I don't feel any difference, or it doesn't make a difference, or I'm not sensing any kind of a difference. But the first days, what I found was that there was not much progress. I kept doing this for several weeks. What I did find is that there's a certain fluency that started to happen. So reading out loud, because then you're doing it. If you read something, it's interesting if you take a student, which I do a lot, and will read something, and then when they read it out loud, they see that it's much more difficult because you're using different faculties. You're not using necessarily your brain, the processing going through the eyes and into the brain and then coming back out. It's a different process. One interesting phenomenon that does happen in this context when you're reading out loud is that often the students that I work with will not actually have understood what they have read. They will understand when they read it, again, silently, if they read silently, but when they do speak out loud. And that just goes to prove that when we're using our linguistic mechanisms, that it's a different function of our brain, and we're definitely multitasking. But it's a very strong way to be able to improve your communication skills. So because how do you learn how to speak? It's by speaking. So reading out loud is one of the strongest ways, and that's something that can be done on their own. Now, one aspect that does come up frequently is working with accent. And this is where a coach or a teacher or somebody can come in and intervene and say, okay, generally speaking, your pronunciation is correct. Can you do a little bit of reading for me? I will do some checking on your accent, et cetera, et cetera. But most of it's okay. In 95% of the cases, it's fine. There is the 5% there are linguistic issues. It depends on what their original languages are. If they're Asian languages, if they're Eastern European languages, or it depends on what the original languages are, that can affect the pronunciation. But there are all of the classics. And for those of you who are teachers that are watching this, you know that too. So reading out loud and giving full sentences, such as how was your weekend last weekend? And I get a student and they'll say good, and say, well, tell me a little bit more. Yeah, and it's not normal. I say it's not normal, but I want lots of words to come out of your mouth. So then we can be checking to see how all of the pronunciation is going. Reading out loud. Okay, this brings us up to point number 9, is that you have to be patient with all of this because it takes time. To be patient with your progress, and particularly that sometimes we don't sense that there's a certain amount of progress that's gone on in our improvement, but everybody else around you will hear it. And when you get people committed to making this help and work for you, they will give you certain kinds of feedback that will permit you to do an evaluation. And there are evaluations that are possible too. But to be patient with your progress, it takes time. Number 9. And this brings me to point number 10, which is probably the culmination of all of what I've been talking about, is that you have to actually get out and communicate. There are certain cultures where it's a little bit more difficult, such as in a comparison, for example, between the French culture, where perfection is part of the mentality. So people will not take advantage of, let's say, having an opportunity to do a presentation in English or another language, where people hesitate. This is something that I have dealt with quite a bit in the past, where people will not communicate. They won't take advantage of going out and doing it. Compared to in Holland, for example, or some of the northern Scandinavian countries, where it's something that there is not this ingrained culture of perfection in the communication. Canada is the same thing, or in the United States, I think it is also the same thing, where people might speak another language a lot quicker, and they're not worried about making mistakes. It's a little bit like a sculpture, that you sculpt and you refine and you make it finer as you go along, and then eventually you have a perfect piece, but you have to go through the process of sculpting it and refining it as you go along. So to be taking advantage of it, don't worry about mistakes. It doesn't matter. So even for important issues such as presentations. So point number 10 is to be going out and actually doing it and to be communicating with people. So, okay, so this brings me to the next part of the presentation, and I just wanted to give you some resources. These are the resources that I know about, that I work with, that we've used. So the first one is TED for listening. Now, TED is a great example of being able to work with a internet site. It has the original translation to the original language, which is mostly in English, but there's also TED now in different languages, so it can be used for other language learning contexts. It's also great for translation because there are the translated versions that are available for everybody, so you can check and try and test those ones out to see how they work. So TED. And the other thing I like about TED is the fact that there are frequently second language speakers. So somebody who is a second language speaker, somebody who is learning, who has learned English as a second language, will speak differently. And there are some of them as on the resources. We put links on the resources on the EnglishAZ site, where you can access, if you want, different TED podcasts. I highly recommend it. They're interesting ideas, so it covers that aspect that it's interesting for. Yeah. The next one that I've been working on are podcasts. Podcasts are interesting because a podcast can be something that's portable. It's something that you can move around with. Podcasts are things that you can play over and over again, and there are so many of them in so many different circumstances that there's bound to be something that will fit your profile and your interests perfectly. There are podcasts also for language learning, so it's possible to access through podcasts. The podcasts that I work with is Spotify. You can find them on Deezer. You can find them on iTunes. You can go through on a regular basis, and because once again it's volume and conscientious learning. So to be able to work with something that you can listen to again and again and again, or you can rewind it or hear it back you can go back 15 seconds so you can hear something again. That's one thing. Next is YouTube. So YouTube is, of course, a great tool. There are language learning modules, and there are also there's such a tremendous variety of different media or for video that on YouTube you have the possibility to access ideas that you like and keep it into an entertainment context. Right? So I had a student last week who was talking to me about finding different ways of working with English, and was asking me about recommending movies that might be of interest for learning. So I proposed Netflix. Now Netflix is very strong for English language learning. The downside is that it costs, of course, but the upside is that there's a tremendous variety. They speak what I call international English, which is more of the California-based accent. And the issue around media right now is that many people are working on, are watching the media series, shows, etc. So that's the accent that they start to understand. So there's a trend. So Netflix is a great tool for picking out different movies. They also have translators depending on which country you're in, but it's possible to do translating through it. So at least subtitling. And in some countries, such as in France, it's possible to have it overdubbed. Which I definitely discourage, but it's possible also. But they have English language subtitles, so it's a very, very effective tool. Work on it regularly. The next aspect is e-learning for sure. To be able to pick up something that is put together in a structured manner. There are several different kinds of e-learning packages. There are apps. There are also e-learning tools that are on the internet. EnglishAZ, for example, is e-learning site. It's a comprehensive e-learning site. It's for A to Z. It tracks you, it follows you, it tells you your strengths and weaknesses. There are other ones that just can track you, let's say, for an exercise. It's not necessarily comprehensive, or they can track you for a series of exercises, and they create a little bit of a competition out of it, which work very well. These tools work very well. The next several sites that I wanted to talk about about our translation sites. There is one site that I have worked with quite a bit. It's called Word Reference. Word Reference is a great site when you need to translate words, so very specific, such as for legal documents, or if you're working with engineers. Engineers want to have this kind of a translation with a specific vocabulary. So Word Reference, www.com. For sentences, for larger structures, there's a great site called Lingui. Lingui works more with larger texts, and the way Lingui works is that it works it will find on the net different sites that have already translated the sentences or the sequence of words that you're putting into it. The advantage of that is you can compare it. So if we're translating it to French and we get some obscure kind of text that comes out of somebody's home-based site, of course, you'll see the translation. But if it's coming out of Le Monde, you know that there's a certain amount of reliability to it. So for that, and then of course to finish, it's possible to use Google Translate, and Google Translate is a quick fix, not super reliable all the time. I think it's getting better, not super reliable, but tools that you can work with as far as internet-based language learning is concerned. Okay, thanks guys. This has been very nice for me to do, and I'm very interested in finding out about what you think about the ideas that I'm sharing as far as using the internet and taking advantage of getting maximum results. As far as the teachers are concerned, as far as the administrators are concerned, as far as the students are concerned, and as far as everybody's concerned, as far as these techniques and strategies for language learning. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you real soon. Don't forget to join us on EnglishAZ. We do have Skype stuff going on. We have webinars. We'll be telling you about all of these things as we go along. Stay in touch. My name is John Johnson, and thank you very much for your